Man attended his best buddy's wedding until the moment he saw the bride. He was shocked to discover that his buddy's bride was actually the girlfriend who had pursued him for 7 years. It turned out that just a few days ago, Alice had finally gotten engaged to Steve, whom she had chased for 7 years, but unexpectedly, Steve's first love. Jessica pretended to faint. Steve immediately wanted to rush over to take her to the hospital. Alice begged him to wait until the engagement banquet was over. Steve was somewhat torn, but when he saw Jessica faint, he shoved Alice aside, picked Jessica up and rushed to the hospital and announced that today's engagement banquet was cancelled. Alice thought back on these 7 years. Time and again, for Steve, she lowered her bottom line, but now she completely saw through Steve. She walked up in front of the guests, took off their engagement ring, and publicly announced she was breaking up with Steve. Then she angrily threw the ring to the ground. Back home, Alice threw away their photos together, packed her luggage, and completely left Steve. When Steve returned home and saw that none of Alice's belongings were left, he thought she was just throwing a little tantrum, so he planned to travel abroad for a few days, thinking Alice would come back to him once she was done fussing. But just after Alice left home, she bumped right into Steve's buddy Anthony's arms. Alice asked him where he was going. Anthony said he wanted to adopt a child, but since he wasn't married, he couldn't adopt Alice. Suddenly had a bold idea. She suggested to Anthony, why don't the two of them get married? Then the two quickly got a marriage certificate. Alice handed the marriage certificate to Anthony and went home first. But what Alice didn't know was Anthony had secretly loved her for more than 10 years. A week later, Steve returned from his trip and upon entering, asked Alice to pour him a glass of water. The maid said Alice had never come back. Steve angrily texted her. Only then did he realize Alice had blocked him. Then Steve found Alice's place and ordered her to go back with him. Alice said they had already broken up. Steve got so angry his stomach hurt. He asked Alice to take him to the hospital, but Alice told his assistant to take him and even handed him the trash she was holding, asking him to throw it away on the way. Steve woke up on the hospital bed and saw a bowl of porridge next to him, thinking Alice had made it for him. Just then, Jessica walked in. Steve then learned it was Jessica who cooked the porridge. He asked the assistant where Alice was. The assistant said Alice hadn't come even once. Meanwhile, Anthony discussed wedding matters with Alice. He worried Steve might show up at their wedding, afraid Alice would be sad when she saw him, but Alice said she had completely let go. She didn't care who showed up at the wedding. That evening, Anthony went to a gathering with his buddies and saw Steve there. Anthony wanted to talk to Steve about Alice, but as soon as Steve heard Alice's name, he immediately cut Anthony off. Anthony accused him of abandoning Alice back then, saying that was his fault. Steve angrily said he was the one who spoiled Alice, and naively thought Alice would come back to him. At that moment, a friend received news Alice had been taken away by the police due to a misunderstanding and needed someone to bail her out. Steve confidently said Alice would call him in 3 seconds, but after 3 seconds, it was Anthony's phone that rang. Steve still thought Alice was just mad at him. The two went to the police station and bailed Alice out. Steve warned Alice that being mad at him was fine, but she shouldn't trouble Anthony. Anthony wanted to tell him about his marriage with Alice, tell Steve, but Alice stopped him. Just then, Jessica called Steve. Steve immediately left Alice behind and went to Jessica. After Alice got home, she saw Steve sitting on her couch and questioned why he had a key to her home. Steve said it was Alice who insisted on giving it to him back then and warned Alice she had gone too far this time. Alice said she wanted nothing to do with Steve. It was over between them. To please Alice, Steve promised not to see Jessica anymore and even hold a grander engagement banquet for Alice. But Alice said she didn't need an engagement banquet because she was already getting married, and she invited Steve to attend her wedding at noon tomorrow. Then she kicked Steve out. The next day at noon, Steve arrived at the wedding venue as promised and bumped into Anthony at the entrance. Seeing Anthony dressed as a groom, he naively congratulated him. Anthony awkwardly invited him in. At the wedding hall, Steve thought Alice was tricking him and had invited Alice to attend Anthony's wedding until the bride appeared. Steve was stunned to see Alice standing on stage in a wedding dress. He rushed onto the stage and questioned why Alice was dressed like that. Alice said it was her wedding. Of course she had to wear a wedding dress, but Steve still thought she was fooling around trying to force him into marriage this way. The guests below started whispering. Steve still didn't realize his stupidity, thinking all these people were actors Alice had hired. Alice was so angry she laughed. She warned Steve one last time. This was her wedding. Steve actually mocked Alice, asking where the groom was, saying maybe she couldn't afford to hire an actor. At that moment, Anthony walked up and said that he was Alice's groom. Steve shook his head and said, impossible. He would never believe it, until Alice, right in front of him, kissed Anthony.